one of the things that we are really proud of is the data science piece of it. And again, I don't want to go too deep into it, but we leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning to understand. I mentioned those large amounts of data before, but to really understand and evolve into the adapting types of fraud. One of which is synthetic fraud. We talk about fraud all the time. In fact, we like to say you can't talk about digital verification without talking about fraud.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Brian Chidester. He's the head of public sector marketing at Socure. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kelsey.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Brian, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm head of public sector marketing at Socure, and I've been in the public sector industry my entire career, which is coming up on 20 years, which is crazy. I just turned 40. But I've absolutely fallen in love with this industry, working with governments, especially as my role kind of got larger into working with global governments throughout my career. It's kind of sucked me in and kept me here. And then the strategy around marketing and content creation and strategy and all of that kind of pulled together. It's the perfect job for me. And I absolutely love what I'm doing.
That's fantastic. I love to hear that. I love when people are passionate about what they do. So tell me a little bit more about, what Socure.
So Socure is an industry leader in digital identity verification. And we work obviously on the public sector side, on the government side. So for those listening, think about getting a new driver's license or filing your taxes at the IRS, or think of a terrible situation, but if you lose your job and you have to file for unemployment insurance, well, there's so much fraud that happens within those different programs, especially as a lot of the listeners might remember, especially during the pandemic, there were billions and billions, maybe trillions of dollars worth of fraud that happened because people were taking advantage of the opportunity. So what our company does is it eliminates that. In fact, our mission is to eliminate 100% of fraud on the internet. So yeah, we have a platform that does a number of different things, obviously, and we don't have to get too technical and into the weeds here. But the thing that I am most proud of from this platform is how we really put digital equity at the head of what we're trying to do. So how do you do that when you're doing a digital platform? Well, one of the things that people get challenged with is you're Kelsey and you go to file for unemployment insurance and you're trying to say, hey, I am the right Kelsey. This is the thing, but you don't get automatically pushed through. Well, that now necessitates a challenge for you because you have to go to perhaps in-person means to go verify who you are or grab a bunch of documents. And it can be time consuming. It took people months during the pandemic for this to happen, to get access to these funds. Well, unfortunately, this number is even higher in minority demographics. So the technology that we have actually scours different databases and leverages multiple areas of content and data to be able to verify beyond just what's traditionally used, which is really just around credit reports. This also, if you think about the 20-somethings that come out of college and they're filing their taxes or they're trying to file for unemployment, well, you don't really have established credit, or a lot of them don't. So how do you get verified without established credit? That's something else that we're able to do and go in other areas to be able to help verify these things. So it gets people the services that they need faster and in a more equitable way.
Wow, that's fantastic. And you mentioned being, in the public sector. Are there different industries as well besides the government that Socure works with?
Yep. So we're actually the industry leader in financial services. So you think all your major banks, everything from like your commercial banks like Bank of America and SunTrust and others, as well as your investment banks. We are the #1 fraud prevention platform and digital verification platform for those banks. So think about getting onboarded into those programs, et cetera. So yeah, there's a number of different industries that we work in, but that's probably the most prominent one that people would know.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I'm curious, obviously the landscape of identity verification has evolved, significantly over the past few years. Talk to me a little bit about what that growth has looked like for Socure.
So, I mean, that's a really good question. So we're not decades and decades old, but we are kind of born at the right time, which is pretty cool. And it's a good time to be at the company. we like to say kind of born in the cloud. And we really are that next generation platform that understands the challenges of today and hasn't tried to evolve into a solution, but really was born in these challenges. So the company has grown leaps and bounds as it was founded by Johnny Ayers. And I think for me, especially the public sector, we're only about a year and a half, almost 2 years into it. And we've already captured 5 of the largest states in the country. So people are really aware of what's happening and what it takes to really mitigate the fraud that's happening. Like I said, it's just an exciting time to be at Socure, right? Yeah. To be on the winning team, to have the best technology and to have all the opportunity is just a cool place to be.
Talk to me a little bit about the potential risks that businesses could, potentially expose themselves to if they don't have, a robust identity verification process.
Well, so I mean, businesses, yes, you really open yourselves up to being defrauded. You'd be surprised. It's not just your average person sitting in their mom's basement trying to defraud people. There are nation states that are funding these things, even funding the fraud that's happening in the United States, other countries trying to steal money from us for terrorist cells and things of that nature. So it is a highly calculated, highly innovative type of business, if you will, and it requires the same type of posture, an even greater posture, leveraging some emerging technologies like AI and ML that are being used against these businesses. But to answer your question, it can be devastating. If you think of the amount of fraud that could come into these things, or on the flip side, if you think about the pandemic and you're a small business and you filed for a small business loan and you didn't get it because of all the fraud that happened and those funds ran out, well, your business could have gone bankrupt. A lot of them did. So it really opens you up to a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenges if you're not leveraging this type of platform, or you're not working with an organization or a government that is leveraging these types of platforms.
You've mentioned the platform and the technology that Socure uses a little bit. Walk me through that a little bit more.
So one of the things that we are really proud of is the data science piece of it. And again, I don't want to go too deep into it, but we leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning to understand. I mentioned those large amounts of data before, but to really understand and evolve into the adapting types of fraud. One of which is synthetic fraud. We talk about fraud all the time. In fact, we like to say you can't talk about digital verification without talking about fraud. And there's 3 major types of fraud. There's first-party fraud, where I'm Brian Chidester and I'm trying to defraud the government leveraging kind of my information in a nefarious way. There's third-party fraud, where I'm trying to steal your identity, Kelsey, to try to get access to credit cards or other funds or other services. And then there's synthetic fraud, which is you are manufacturing a person through disparate data sources and disparate pieces of information. And by leveraging these emerging technologies, we're really able to understand kind of what's happening with these trends and pull from different data sets to mitigate these types of growing fraud trends happening within the industry.
I think the importance, you've said it several times now, the importance of having, this platform, this software. Talk to me a little bit about, you said that Socure is the head of the industry for financial services. Talk to me about a few ways that, Socure is also able to really differentiate itself a little bit more.
Well, so that's one of them. Another one is through the consortium data, which we talked about. So not only do we have these data sets open up that we pull into, but we get these from our customers. And the cool part about it is the customers are sharing data with us. So we're able to understand those trends across all banks, right? Not just like a general pool, but across all of our customers. And by sharing that data, we become stronger as one. And that's one of the things that we really stand on top of. Another is we're trying to do the same thing at the state level, right? We're trying to get different state level leaders to share this type of data. And obviously it's more of a challenge within government, but share this level of data so we can become smarter about the ways that fraudsters are trying to infiltrate these programs. And then also take a look at the types of programs that are being defrauded at a higher rate. Is it your SNAP programs or unemployment insurance, or is it at the Department of Motor Vehicles or Bureau of Motor Vehicles? Where is the highest level of fraud? One of the things we're going to be doing in 2024 is putting out a report that shows certain data points like that, right? What are the highest, what programs are infiltrated at the highest rate, right? Where are the most incidents happening across the country? Is it based on the size of the state, or is a small state like Vermont and Connecticut really getting hammered because they lack some of the budget to support it? So these are some of the nuances and the data points we're going to pull out, but we really pride ourselves, and I think that's also what differentiates us. We really pride ourselves in being data driven, understanding where to go, what needs to happen, all because we understand the data science behind it.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit, talking about, do you see the people that you interact with, the businesses, the different sectors, do you see them interacting with Socure as more of a response to fraud, or do you find that people are more proactive, with the, I feel like fraud is, in the news more, it's more of a concern for people. Do you feel that people are more reactive, or, what do you think about that?
That's a really good question. I think on the commercial side, so again, let's use financial services as an example. I think they tend to be a lot more proactive, right? When there's millions and millions of dollars on the line. And on top of that, they're trying to give their customers the best customer experience they can by getting them through in milliseconds, but also eliminating those fraud points. It becomes prerequisite to doing business in that industry. So they tend to be more proactive. I think government, and I mentioned it being such a perfect time to be at Socure, government is finally shifting that posture from reactive to proactive. And one of those catalysts was really the pandemic. We saw so much fraud happening. They weren't prepared. And now they understand the need for a platform like ours. And a lot of RFPs and a lot of organizations are being more proactive about inquiring about data points and information about what goes into these platforms, et cetera, to get smarter on it. So yeah, to answer your question, I think in commercial, they're much more proactive, but government is shifting to a more proactive posture, which is, as a citizen, which is very, very nice to see.
Yeah. Do you think that is, a common misconception in the industry? So kind of a two-pronged question. One, that people, are more reactive than responsive. Or, what would you say the most significant misconception about the industry is?
You mean misconception about government?
About not necessarily government, but, just, kind of Socure and, the identity verification.
I don't know about a misconception. I think one of the things that maybe people think is that it should be perhaps easier than it is. I think when you're dealing with the amount of money that's at stake and the amount of risk that's at stake, the type of technology that goes into securing something like that I think it's really, really intricate and nuanced. And even though you pass through in milliseconds, there's a lot of friction points, and maybe that's also another kind of misconception. I like to say that friction isn't a 4-letter word, even though in our industry people look at friction as a bad thing because they think friction and they think getting the constituent or the citizen further away from that service, right? Well, I disagree. I think friction is really, really important. Also, just like filtering your water is important, right? You don't want there to be low friction. You want there to be a lot of friction in that process because you want to drink clean water. But at the end of the day, you want clean candidates coming out, and there has to be friction there, and there should be a lot of friction there. What that friction doesn't have to be, though, is intrusive. You can still get through very, very quickly. In fact, we pride ourselves in being the fastest in the industry, but we put a lot of layers of friction within there to ensure that if people are automatically verified, that they are exactly who they say they are. So I think maybe that's a misconception, is that friction is a bad thing. I think friction is a positive thing. If at the end of the day, getting rid of fraud is what you're looking for.
Oh, hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, Brian, as we start to wrap up this episode, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with, either, about Socure, about the industry, your experience, anything you want to leave our listeners with?
I think one of the things, and just to kind of spin that last question on its head, around the government industry, I think there's a lot of people out there that think that government moves really slow, right? And I think to an extent that's right, but I think a lot of people, so a misconception around government, a lot of people have to understand there's a lot of citizen risk that's involved in this, right? There's a lot of, if I'm putting my tax money out there every single year and government is using that to procure certain things, they are being more risk averse because they want to make sure that they're good stewards of the money that I'm giving them, right? And you're giving them, and the listeners are giving them. So I think understanding that government might be a little slower than commercial, but there's a reason for it. Even if you're waiting in line at the DMV trying to get your license, or a digital service isn't quite up to par, I think it's something that government's working on. And they are really investing in it heavily, but they're doing it in a way that makes them good stewards of those tax dollars. So just something to think about as you're interacting with public servants.
I think that's fantastic. Well, Brian, if people wanted to go to learn more about Socure, where can they go?
Socure.com, SOCURE.com. It's a place to go.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, this has been a terrific conversation. I really appreciate, you breaking down the insights of the government, everything about Socure, identity verification, the financial services industry. I think this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you being on Business Ninjas today.
Thanks for having me, Kelsey. This was fun.
Yeah, great to have you.